Welcome to the place where we gain knowledge through the lens of creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Artful Science. Thanks again for joining me here on Artful Science. Today's show is Emboxed Discourse, considering the use of American Sign Language in the age of Zoom. And my guest is Julie Hochgesang, who serves as Associate Professor of Linguistics and is the IRB Chair at Gallaudet University. Julie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So I figured let's just dive right into it. You are a deaf professor who's taught and researched sign language and linguistics literally like all over the world. It's extraordinary, your background. So, but many in our audience may not be familiar with the science of sign language, even though they've seen it in many circumstances. So could you kind of just share, a quick overview of American Sign Language? Like, how does it work? Are there interpretations for each word? Help us to just better understand it.
Sure. So I think it's safe to say that many people now are familiar with American Sign Language, which we say ASL. It's becoming more and more popular. There are videos. I have one good friend, Lauren Ridloff. She's actually going to be a star in the next Marvel movie.
What's Eternals is the name of that movie.
Eternals is the name of the movie. So that's just one example of what's really accessible these days. So people are very familiar with that. Although still they may be unfamiliar with what ASL is. So I am a linguist, which means I study human languages. And that doesn't mean I'm limited to just one language, but really just the study of all languages and human language and, what that is and what the patterns are in general in specific languages, across various modes of languages. And so language is a system that has various parts that can be put together in various ways and can do many things to create meaning. So language can be signed or spoken. And these are the two primary modes that a language can be expressed in. And there are spoken languages around the world, approximately 7,000. And then, of course, how you define a language is very political, but in general, there are about 7,000 spoken languages around the world, and there are sign languages around the world. And right now, people are saying there are approximately 300 sign languages around the world, and there is no correspondence between the sign languages and the spoken languages in their regional area. And as you know, humans don't stay in one place, right? Humans are very mobile. We interact with, various people around the world, and deaf people become deaf in different ways. Some people are born into a deaf family. Some people become ill and lose their hearing. And there are many other ways as well. So sometimes there are deaf people who are isolated, and then they may move so that they can be near other deaf people, maybe in a deaf school, or just so they can interact with other deaf people, so that they can, so that language can emerge within those groups. And so sometimes what happens is they're bringing languages from their local communities to this central location where, they are building their own languages emerging naturally. So some influences from other languages end up in there. And the history is very complicated of American Sign Language. So it originated in France, and French deaf people came over here and started a deaf school in Martha's Vineyard, or they came over to Martha's Vineyard, where there were many deaf people, and there were many native users of sign language already here. Some were deaf, some were hearing, but there were native communities who came together, who actually were hearing and all spoke different spoken language systems. And so they developed gestural systems so that they could communicate with one another.
Gotcha. So this is extraordinary.
I'm sorry. So we paused for the interpreter.
Sorry.
1 second. Yeah, just so the interpreter could catch up. And my apologies for giving you such a long history lesson of languages, but basically I wanted to emphasize that languages are each their own system, and they are influenced by other systems around them. But American Sign Language is not a representation of spoken English at all. It is its own language. And it's actually more American than English, because as you know, our spoken English is from the UK. It's not really native to America. So American Sign Language is quite a bit more native to America than spoken English, but it has its own unique history separate from spoken English. And, US, Canada, Mexico, they all have their own sign languages, which then, of course, also influence the use of American Sign Language. So I study ASL, and there is not one ASL. There are many, just like there's no one English. Many different communities use English in different ways. And so I study ASL and how it's used in different ways in different communities. So long story short, to answer your question, no, there is not a one-to-one correspondence. All languages are unique in and of themselves. And, all languages also have influences from other languages, whether it's a food or a color or numbers. And so all languages have that in common. So they're all unique, and they all have their own unique concepts and expressions that are almost impossible to translate into another language. And ASL is not unique in that matter. It is, has those same features. So ASL is a language just like any other language in the world. So my apologies for going quickly for the interpreter, but there you have it.
No worries. It's extraordinary. I've learned so much literally just in the last couple of minutes that I was not aware of. And several things even stood out to me, and we'll talk a little bit more about the arts kind of piece a little bit later. And the show is at the intersection of the arts, but to me, it feels like in ASL, there is just art. As I just sit and have a conversation with you, I feel like it's an artistic experience more so than other conversations that I might have that are not in ASL, which is just a beautiful experience. And the other thing that stood out to me was how there isn't a correlation, you were saying, between other sign languages and their resident cultures. Like it's not a tie-in to that spoken language or written language. I also found that very interesting. So of course, right, this past year, there has been the pandemic, and so many people's lives went on Zoom, and so many ways in which we communicate or work has changed. And I was wondering, has there been a specific impact in the deaf community or related to ASL in terms of the use of Zoom?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, here we are in this very small box, limited by this box, and it's been controlling our lives for the past year and a half. And as you know, as humans, we are adaptable. We adapt to our current situations, or we fail to adapt. And it really all depends on the tools or the resources that are at our disposal, and the languages that we use. So language is something that humans actually use, for lack of a better word, but we use it in the world. Language is not static, it's dynamic, continually adapting to our environment and what is needed. And like you said before, ASL feels to you it's a very different experience to you. And it is because it's a different mode. You use a spoken language. You have a very small apparatus, just the mouth, the tongue, the lips that move. And you use air to actually create sound. So you're using a very small space that is not visible to the eyes, and you're using your ears to hear the sound waves. And that's what makes words. You create words and you receive words. And so it may not be as impacted by Zoom. And American Sign Language is completely the opposite. We don't use just the mouth, but rather the full body. And I know that using spoken language, sometimes you use gestures, but it's a lot less, and it's not conscious most often. Whereas with ASL, our articulators are our arms and our face, and we move. And oftentimes, if we're in person, we make shifts, we move our bodies. It's a 3D experience. Now we are in a 2D environment with a very small box, which is limiting our signing space. Now, also, when you're using spoken language, when you're listening, you don't need to necessarily use your eyes. Now, I do notice some hearing people like to, look at one another on Zoom, but more so than in person. But in American Sign Language, it's a visual language, and it's very important to maintain eye contact. Now, I just want to say there are deafblind people who use what we call protactile ASL, and they don't use their eyes or their ears, but rather tactile American Sign Language. And that's not what I'm talking about right now. What I'm talking about is visual American Sign Language, which sighted people use, sighted deaf people in America. So we use our physical space to sign, and we use the visual space to communicate and see one another. So if I sign this, for example, this means give. That sign is actually directional, so that I know who I'm giving it to. I can say, I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to the person beside me to my right. And in Zoom, eye contact's not the same. Right now, I'm looking at you, but you may not even know I'm looking at you, because the camera makes it so that we don't know exactly who we are looking at. And my apologies. Signing can be dangerous. I just knocked my necklace. But we need to be very careful about pointing in person. I don't have to say I'm looking at you specifically, or I'm talking to you. I can just point. On Zoom, I need to, and this is my sign name, by the way, say, somebody would need to say, Julie, I'm giving this to you, which is very odd. And on Zoom, people will say names a whole lot more than we ever do in American Sign Language, which is very odd for us, because in North America, in the deaf community, we don't actually use names to address people. We point that is part of the language. And when people use my name on Zoom, it almost feels like there's something wrong. But I know in English and spoken language, it's a sign of respect. But in sighted ASL discourse, it's a very odd phenomenon. It's new. But on Zoom, because we have so many boxes here, and we can't tell who we're looking at, we need to say their name. And so that's just one example of what's happened since we have moved to this Zoom environment. And like I said before, language is always adapting. And, it doesn't mean it'll never be the same again. ASL is adapting just like any other language, and whether it's spoken or signed. And, we always adapt to whatever is in our environment.
It's truly extraordinary. And also just learning about how, like so many things, it has really just adapted. We are, if anything, adaptable. And so unfortunately, we're running short on time, but I always like to ask all my guests about their own arts interests or endeavors. And so was just wondering kind of either what arts practice you really love and or engage in, or that you love to appreciate. And I see you love visual art. Your ink is so awesome and amazing. And so just kind of curious your arts interests.
Yeah, thank you. So in general, absolutely, I love art. And I don't consider myself a good artist, but I do photography. And I really enjoy macro photography. I don't have it to show you, but I have a little micro film. I love capturing bugs and animals and the cicadas, especially now. Being here. And so I think I've probably taken 300 to 400 pictures of the cicadas. They're just beautiful. And their eyes, those red eyes and their wings. If when you get really close up, you can see the details. So I love that kind of thing. I also enjoy origami. And I really am limited to just the crane. I can't actually do any other kind of origami, but I've done over 50,000 or 60,000 or maybe even more cranes in the past 10 years. I can't stop doing it. I watch TV and I just create them. So those are the two things I really enjoy. And they really fit with my view of science. I like to see this very small details. Because in those small details, you always see the larger picture. You can see the patterns. So that is something I really enjoy.
Well, you've definitely touched to the heart of my childhood growing up. I was just steeped in origami, had these giant oversized origami books.
Oh, wow.
And loved it. I definitely did not reach 50,000, but I definitely made a lot of cranes for sure. And you're absolutely right. There's something, it just fills you. For me, at least, I had some, intense experiences, and it brought a sense of tranquility and calm that was very, very nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, Julie Hochgesang, thank you for helping us gain knowledge through the lens of creativity here on Artful Science. I can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.